The United States Pacific Command covers more than half the Earth's surface. It extends from the western coast of North America across the entire Pacific Ocean through the Indian Ocean to the eastern coast of Africa. It encompasses 36 nations, 3.5 billion people, and the most economically dynamic region in human history. It is, by any reasonable measure, the most strategically significant military theater on the planet. And for the first time since the Second World War, the United States is losing it, not in a single battle, not through a dramatic military defeat that would generate headlines and congressional hearings. It is losing it through a slow, grinding, bureaucratic, and financial retreat that the Pentagon's own budget documents reveal in numbers that have not been synthesized for the public in any comprehensive way until now. What I am going to show you today is the financial forensics of American strategic decline in the Pacific, why it is happening, what it costs, who benefits, and why the most expensive retreat in American military history is also the most consequential geopolitical shift since the Cold War ended. The honest account of American strategic intentions in any region is not found in speeches, not in diplomatic communiques, not in press conference declarations. It is found in budget authorizations, procurement contracts, and force posture data. And the Pacific budget data tells a story that contradicts almost everything American officials say publicly about their commitment to the region. The Pentagon's fiscal year 2024 Pacific Deterrence Initiative, or PDI, received $9.1 billion in authorized funding. That sounds substantial until you understand the context. China's military expenditure for 2024 was officially $225 billion, though the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimates the true figure, adjusted for purchasing power parity and accounting for concealed expenditures, at approximately $400 billion. More relevantly, China's military spending has grown at an average annual rate of 7.2% for the past decade, compounding to a cumulative increase of approximately 100% since 2014. The United States has increased its Pacific Deterrence Initiative by roughly $2.3 billion over the same period in nominal terms without adjustment for inflation. In real terms, the American commitment to Pacific deterrence has declined, while China's has roughly doubled. The ratio that matters is not the absolute number, it is the trajectory. And the trajectory unmistakably favors Beijing. Consider this specific example. The Air Force has requested $55 billion over the next 5 years to develop and field a new long-range strike aircraft, optimized for Pacific combat scenarios. The program has already been delayed twice due to cost overruns at Northrop Grumman. The delivery date has slipped from 2027 to 2030. Meanwhile, China has put its H-20 stealth bomber into limited production and has operationally deployed the DF-26 ballistic missile, which can strike U.S. bases in Guam at a cost per shot of approximately $4 million. The American aircraft carrier, each of those missiles, is designed to threaten costs $13 billion. That is a cost-exchange ratio of 3,250 to 1 in China's favor, in missile terms. The United States' ability to project power in the Pacific depends on a network of bases, logistics hubs, and pre-positioned equipment that was designed in the 1950s, built primarily in the 1960s and 1970s, and has been chronically underfunded for maintenance since the Cold War ended. The Government Accountability Office published a comprehensive assessment in November 2023 that quantified the Pacific infrastructure backlog at approximately $28 billion. This is not the cost of expansion. This is the cost of returning existing facilities to functional operational standards. Airfield runways at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam that cannot support fully loaded B-52 launches. Fuel storage facilities at Diego Garcia rated as structurally deficient. port infrastructure at Yokosuka that requires $2.8 billion in modernization to accommodate the Navy's new carrier class. Each of these deficiencies is not a symbolic problem. It is a tactical problem. An airbase that cannot launch fully loaded bombers at maximum weight reduces the strike radius of those aircraft in exactly the theater where extended range is most operationally critical. Fuel storage deficiencies mean that in a conflict scenario, Pacific bases would need resupply from continental United States within days rather than weeks, creating logistical vulnerability that a Chinese submarine force specifically optimized for anti-supply operations could exploit. The Pentagon's own war gaming documents, portions of which have been published in defense trade journals and congressional testimony, show that in most simulated Taiwan conflict scenarios, U.S. forces exhaust critical munitions within 7 to 10 days and face logistical constraints that would require a fighting pause to resolve. 7 to 10 days. China has 38 amphibious assault ships. Taiwan is 110 miles from the Chinese coast. Here's the number that should end the debate about whether American strategic withdrawal from the Pacific is happening. The United States produces 28,000 artillery shells per month. In the 12 months following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the United States provided Ukraine with approximately 2,155 millimeter shells. That represents a drawdown of existing stockpiles equivalent to approximately 6 years of current production capacity. The Pentagon has committed to expanding production to 100,000 shells per month by 2025. China produces an estimated 1.5 million artillery shells per month, according to defense analysis published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. China's shell production capacity exceeds American capacity by a factor of more than 50 to 1. This disparity is not a temporary artifact of the Ukraine commitment. It reflects a structural difference in industrial policy that has developed over 30 years of American manufacturing decline and Chinese industrial investment. The United States has one active shipyard capable of producing nuclear submarines at a throughput of approximately 1.3 boats per year. China has expanded its submarine fleet from 42 boats in 2000 to 79 boats today, with a production rate that the Office of Naval Intelligence estimates at 6 to 8 submarines per year. The United States Navy has 48 attack submarines in service. China will exceed that number within this decade at current production trajectories. Numbers that should concentrate the mind of anyone who has studied the Pacific's geography. 60% of world trade passes through sea lanes that intersect the South China Sea. The nation that controls the South China Sea controls the arterial flow of the global economy. Think about what this means for the alliance system America has built over 70 years. Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines. These nations have structured their defense strategies around the assumption of American military primacy in the Pacific. When that primacy erodes, not hypothetically, but measurably, quantifiably, documentably, those nations face a choice. They can accelerate their own defense buildups, which Japan is now doing with a 2% of GDP defense commitment and specific investments in counterstrike capabilities. They can begin hedging, maintaining American alliance relationships while quietly exploring accommodation with Beijing. Or they can wait and hope. The data suggests they are doing all three simultaneously, which is precisely what nations do when they are uncertain about the reliability of their security guarantor. The Pacific is not Europe. A conflict in the Taiwan Strait is not analogous to a conflict in Ukraine. The tyranny of distance is absolute. Pearl Harbor is 5,095 miles from Taipei. San Diego is 6,748 miles. Even at the top speed of a carrier strike group, 30 knots in ideal conditions, a carrier departing San Diego would take approximately 9 days to reach the Taiwan Strait. 9 days during which a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, if one were initiated, would be proceeding at the maximum pace Chinese amphibious doctrine allows. The question of whether American forces could arrive in time to affect the outcome of a Taiwan conflict is primarily a question of pre-positioning, which requires the very base infrastructure that is currently deteriorating, and of logistics sustainability, which requires the industrial production capacity that is currently lagging Chinese capacity by factors of 10 to 50 to 1, depending on the munition. The Defense Logistics Agency manages approximately $5.2 billion of pre-positioned equipment and munitions in the Pacific Theater. Military planning documents obtained through congressional testimony suggest that optimal deterrence would require approximately $28 billion of pre-positioned critical munitions in theater. The actual stockpile represents 18.6% of the assessed requirement. Consider the implications from a military planning perspective. A deterrent strategy that is funded at 18.6% of its assessed requirement is not a deterrent strategy. It is a declaration of limitation. China's military planners read those same congressional testimonies. They have access to the same GAO reports. They can perform the same division calculation. 5. 2 billion divided by 28 billion equals 18.6%. The gap between American declaratory policy, defending Taiwan, defending the open Pacific order, and American actual capability, as measured in pre-positioned munitions and base infrastructure, is the widest it has been since before the Korean War. In 2011, the Obama administration announced the Pivot to Asia, a reorientation of American strategic and economic engagement toward the Pacific Theater. It was hailed as the defining strategic initiative of the 21st century. 60% of American naval assets would be repositioned to the Pacific. The Trans-Pacific Partnership would create an economic architecture that bound Pacific democracies more tightly to the United States than to China. The Marine Corps would be restructured for distributed maritime operations in the Pacific Island chains. The pivot would be the defining strategic commitment of a generation. Here is what actually happened. Defense budgets were cut through the Budget Control Act of 2011, which imposed sequestration caps that reduced defense spending by approximately $500 billion over a decade. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was killed by domestic political opposition and was formally withdrawn from by the Trump administration in January 2017. The Marine Corps restructuring, the Force Design 2030 initiative, has been implemented but has generated significant internal debate about whether the structure optimized for Pacific Island combat has reduced Marine Corps capability for the contingencies that actually arise, which have included operations in the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe. The pivot, in summary, was announced, partially resourced, disrupted by domestic politics, and is now being quietly reassessed. Meanwhile, China used the decade between 2011 and 2021 to complete 3,200 acres of artificial island construction in the South China Sea, deploying military infrastructure, including runways, radar installations, and missile batteries on features that international arbitration ruled were not China's sovereign territory. The construction cost approximately $3 billion. The strategic value in terms of projecting Chinese military presence into the heart of the Pacific's most critical shipping lanes is incalculable. China built permanent military infrastructure at the cost of a modest office park. The United States spent a decade announcing a pivot it never fully executed. Nature abhors a vacuum. Strategic space abhors it even more. The American withdrawal from Pacific primacy, measured in budget trajectories, base deterioration, industrial deficits, and the pivot that never completed, is not occurring into a void. It is occurring into a space being actively, patiently, and systematically filled by the People's Republic of China. The Belt and Road Initiative has committed more than $1 trillion to infrastructure investment in Pacific and Indian Ocean nations, creating port access rights, economic dependencies, and diplomatic relationships that translate directly into strategic presence. Djibouti hosts China's only acknowledged overseas military base, opened in 2017. The Solomon Islands signed a security agreement with China in 2022 that the Australian Strategic Policy Institute assessed as potentially enabling Chinese naval access within 1,700 miles of the Australian coast. Cambodia is constructing a Chinese-funded naval facility at Ream that multiple intelligence assessments have concluded will accommodate Chinese warships. The United States' response to each of these developments has followed a consistent pattern: diplomatic protests, assurances of commitment to allies, and insufficient material action to reverse the trajectory. The gap between American statements and American capabilities in the Pacific is precisely China's strategic opportunity. Every dollar not spent on Pacific base modernization is an argument for regional states to hedge. Every year of production industrial deficit is a demonstration that American extended deterrence has limitations that paper commitments cannot cover. And every leaked war game showing U.S. forces running out of munitions within 7 to 10 days of a Taiwan conflict is a signal to every Pacific nation that the cost of being on the wrong side of that conflict is a calculation each must make for itself. The most expensive retreat in American history is not happening with a press conference or a treaty signature. It is happening in procurement tables, in deferred maintenance schedules, in production numbers, and in the slowly widening gap between what America says it will do in the Pacific and what its military and industrial structure can actually sustain. China is not retreating. China is patient. And patience, when your opponent is retreating, is the most powerful strategy of all.